Good evening. Today is Thursday, November 4th, 2021. I now call this Fairfield City School District Board of Education work session to order. Mrs. Lane, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Begley.
Here.
Mr. Birding.
Present?
Mr. Clark.
Present.
Mrs. Gundrum.
Here.
Mrs. Shorter.
Here.
Mr. Clark, will you please lead us in the pledge?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Clark. The first item on our agenda is presentations and resolutions. Turn over to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Birding, and members of the board. We do have one presentation scheduled this evening. The focus of the presentation will be the state report card, student assessments, and interventions. This time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Aug.
So thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Birding, members of the board. We are here tonight to discuss the state report card assessments and interventions, as Mr. Smith mentioned. So this presentation is really kind of a combination of two presentations. You know that we typically do a state report card update for you, but last spring the board also asked to know more about all of the assessments that we administer and use in a student's K-12 experience, and how the district then uses that information to make improvements and meet the needs of kids. So we thought these two would kind of fit nicely together, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So let's start with the state report card. So this is the second year in a row that no ratings or overall component grades were given. So this presentation tonight will look different than it has in the past. They did provide available data to us related to the 6 components of the report card. And that data should inform our continuous improvement efforts and our recovery efforts to help the district set priorities. So what I'm going to share with you tonight, since we can't really go through each one of those components, I'm just going to give you some of the big takeaways that we had from looking at the available data on our report card. So, like other schools across the state, Fairfield saw the greatest learning loss in mathematics. We know this based on the achievement scores that we received, gap closing scores, progress and value added data as well. We also know that the district's most vulnerable student populations were impacted the most. And again, we saw this in achievement data, gap closing data, and also in attendance data. One of the other things I wanted to share with you is a quick comparison of the district to the state report card. So each year, ODE releases its own state report card. And one of the things that we were pleased to see was that we were above state average in certain categories. And that's what I have in that chart there for you. And I just want you to know I did not pick and choose these categories. I went through the Ohio State report card line by line, and this is what they reported out and gave more information on. And that's why I pulled that out, pulled our scores to compare those. So I didn't just pick and choose to make us look good. Then the final thing I will touch on, which is somewhat related to our report card, even though this information is typically released after the report card data. And this is the district's value-added ratings. So value-added modeling is all about growth. It's used to measure academic growth rates of groups of students from year to year. And so this is really important to us to see, are we at least moving in the right direction? Are we growing students? And so all of this information is modeled on our test scores. So when we got the value-added data back, and you can see here that we are at or above expected growth in many of these categories, it really was something for us to celebrate. Because, even though we didn't meet the mark in our achievement scores, we are at least growing kids and moving in the right direction. Like I said earlier, students across the state struggled in math. Our achievement scores reflected that, our gap closing scores reflected that, and as you can see here, our value-added scores reflected that as well. So that's really an area that we need to focus on in the district. So now I'm going to turn it over to the rest of our team to discuss assessments and interventions. What I just shared with you is really in the past. That was last year's data. This part of the presentation will focus more on the here and now. What other assessments do we use year to year, month to month, day to day to identify student needs? And then more importantly, what do we do with all of that information? It's easy to collect data, but what do we do with it once we have it? How do we use it to meet the needs of our students? So we'll talk about that, and then Mrs. Gilbert will kind of round things out to talk about how we're working with Hamilton County ESC to improve on some of our intervention practices. So I'll turn it over now to Mr. Jeffers.
Good evening, Board. I'm Dan Jeffers, Coordinator of Data and Instructional Technology. Work in the Curriculum Office with Mrs. Aug. Assessments and interventions. As you can see here, these are some of the assessments available to our teachers that we use with our students each year. Some of them are state assessments that they are required to give. Some of them are used for gifted identification. Some of them are used for readiness levels. Some of them are used for progress monitoring. But what is fantastic about these assessments now is that most of them can be administered with devices that are now available for all of our students. So we are very thankful for that opportunity that those students can take those assessments electronically because it gives teachers nearly instant access to the data that they need to inform their instruction. So if you think about formative assessments, teachers can give quick formative assessments to check students' stress levels. They can give quick formative assessments to determine students' understanding, how they feel about where they fit in what has been taught that day or the day before. And teachers can do this with a quick glance and look at that and see quickly that the majority of the students are feeling good about it and some of them aren't. But what's wonderful about this particular tool is that once they get students started on the next thing, they can go back and look and see which check mark belongs to which student so that they can then go back and revisit with those students. Then we have benchmark assessments. This is data from the state readiness assessment and data from MAP assessments that are snapshots at a certain point in time for our students, and they help our teachers with general knowledge of where the students are with respect to the standards and even help them do some grouping with those students based on the results of those assessments. That lower one there is a MAP report that kind of shows where students are together with regard to the benchmarks that they're working on. And then we have common formative and summative assessments that allow teachers to have access to individual data for their own classroom, but then since they're common and given across the district, then they have longitudinal data that they can use with their peers that teach the same things that they teach to look for areas of weakness and strength and share things with each other about how their students are doing. This is an example of a standards report based on the 4 standards that were covered in this assessment. And then this would be an item analysis report. And so because our students are able to take these assessments electronically, this data is available for teachers right away
and they can use it to inform their instruction.
Hello, I'm Katie Postfischel, Coordinator of Secondary Curriculum and Instruction, also work in the curriculum office with Ms. Ogg. And I'm going to be talking about how our teachers use the data and kind of going on and adding to what Mr. Jeffers was talking about regarding our formative and summative assessments. And as you know, our teachers collect a multitude of data to inform their instruction within the classroom on a daily basis. By using student data, teachers are able to identify student deficits, their gaps in their learning, learning loss, their areas of strength, and their areas of progress and growth. By knowing and using the data from the teachers, we are able to make changes to our daily instruction, such as reteaching, focusing on the greatest need, creating differentiated lessons and activities, and provide enrichment opportunities. As you saw on the previous slide, there are many sources of data that we capture from our students throughout their entire educational journey within Fairfield. Each of the assessments given provides different data and information, and therefore there is not one assessment that is necessarily more valuable than any other assessment. Formative and summative assessments are the most common ways of collecting the student data. Formative assessment is best described as taking the temperature of the student at a given time and at a specific standard, unit, or lesson. This data is diagnostic in nature and can be done multiple times throughout one given class period, or a week, month, day, year. Formative diagnostic data can help the teacher do the following. It can inform their instruction. What are my next steps within this lesson? What are my next steps within this standard? It can help create flexible grouping. Who needs support? Who needs the enrichment? It can help reteach. Do I reteach a small portion? Do I reteach a small grouping of students? And do I do a full group reteaching? And it can also provide extension paths. Do I need to do something more project-based? Have our students mastered the standard and therefore I'm able to expand their learning? Summative data most commonly is the end of the unit assessments or assessments such as Ohio State tests. Data from summative assessment teachers can ask the questions such as, did my students learn the content and skills that I taught? Have my students mastered the standards that I was assessing? If it is a summative assessment for a unit, the teacher may ask, if my students did not master them, how will I reteach, differentiate, adjust my instruction, provide growth-provoking feedback, and fill in the gaps my students may have? If it's an OST or end-of-course exam, teachers can use the data to assess their instruction. What areas were my students scoring above? What areas did my students struggle? What strategies have my colleagues seen success within their students? They can also review and adjust their curriculum calendars and curriculum maps if needed. For examples, just of some ways that you can utilize the data, a teacher may give map results and make a determination that some of her students have gaps within a specific standard or area, while other students scored high within that same area. The teacher could determine how to place the students with purposeful planning to have the students either work on that specific skill deficit or may have those students who have scored high work in an area to provide stretch and enrichment. A teacher may receive a student's map results back, and there are some students who scored below 40%. Knowing this information, the teacher may need to assess with a different assessment that allows the teacher to dig deeper and to find out the root cause and provide the needed intervention for the student. The teachers know that one of the most important things to do within the classroom is to take the temperature of the students on a daily basis. Our teachers regularly use data, whether it's in the form of the one above mentioned formal type assessments, exit tickets gauging student understanding, using a multitude of the technology that Mr. Jeffers had spoken about, using response cards or whiteboards to give the students an opportunity to show what they know. By taking the temperature of each student, each day, each class, the teacher is able to make real-time adjustments to their teaching, instruction, and activities, and therefore meet the needs of their students, no matter what the students' needs may be. And then we have Ms. Gilbert to talk about our needs assessment.
Let's pull this down here. Okay, so I'm Kathy Gilbert. I'm the Director of Special Services, and we decided this year for the Special Services Department and the Curriculum Department to work collaboratively with Hamilton County Educational Service Center to have a needs assessment done. And what this needs assessment is it's looking at students with disabilities, and it's looking at our Title I programming to see what interventions we have in place to show that we have a continuum, so that if a student isn't making progress utilizing one intervention, what else can we do to intensify and to close that achievement gap? We have already completed step 1, and that step was to have a survey sent out to various stakeholders. We received a 70% participation rate for intervention specialists and for Title I, and we received about a 40% cooperation with our educational assistants. So our next step is to meet with Hamilton County Educational Service Center here in a couple weeks, and we're going to talk about who's going to get interviewed as part of this process. And obviously, we're going to have to get some feedback from our educational assistants because we didn't get as much input as what we had hoped. And then we are going to look at our hierarchy to determine how we can intensify as we move along the spectrum to provide a full continuum of service. And that is the end of our presentation. Do you have any questions for any of us?
Any questions, comments from the board?
Yeah, I think I had one. So, being directed to Mrs. Aug. With some of that ESSER money, we were able to hire some additional assistants, and so then are we able to immediately place them where they might best be used to address some of these deficiencies as we find them?
Yes, so we did hire academic support tutors, and we only have a couple of those positions that we haven't filled. We just haven't been able to find people, so I think maybe one at North, one at Creekside that we haven't filled. But the ones that we do have in place, we are using them in different ways. So for example, I think, for example, out west, one of Mrs. Muller's goals is to increase foundational reading skills in K and 1, and they are also piloting a math program in those lower grade levels. So she attached her academic support tutors specifically to those grade levels to help, bring those kids up to speed and to monitor those programs and to offer teachers support. We just had a meeting with the high school building administrators this week, and they were telling us that they used their readiness assessment results within each tested area, and their academic support tutors are working in those tested areas specifically with students who scored below proficient on the Ohio Readiness Assessment, which is kind of a new assessment that Ohio put out to help schools understand where our biggest gaps are. And so students in grades 9 through 12 in tested subject areas took the readiness assessments in the first 2 to 3 weeks of school. That data returned to us within 24 hours. And so on our in-service day on September 3rd, those core subject area teachers got together, broke down that data, looked at their achievement data from last year as well, and said, okay, here are some gaps. And then they looked at specific students who needed help, and then they worked to set schedules for their academic support tutors to serve students in those areas. So just different approaches, but still the same idea. And the high school folks said to us, they are so eager, they have been great, they are really getting after it and just doing great things with the kids. So they're very excited to have that resource.
Great. Great to hear.
I got a question, Ms. Auger, Mr. Jeffers. The sample report, data reports related to the kids themselves, the stress and the formative check and understanding, are the kids receptive to that, and does that get conveyed to the parents?
Anytime the students have an opportunity to respond live to questions that teachers ask. So that question shows up on the teacher's screen, but then it shows up on all the students' screen, and they get to interact with it and make their choice. And they absolutely love being able to participate actively in those type formative assessments. So that slide might appear at the beginning of their lesson for the day, the stress slide, and then the teacher will refer to it later. In terms of sharing with families, I don't have an answer for you on that. Whether
That's
or not
okay.
teachers are sharing those specific slides with those. But the data is, once they create the presentation with that slide in it, the data remains. So they have that data that they can refer to at a later date. For example, parent-teacher conferences that are occurring tonight.
I just left one
They can
today. I
share
was
that
wondering about
information.
that, if that's part of their conveyance to the parents of how the student's been receptive or
We don't,
behavior.
I really harp on them to never delete anything. Just keep it, and they have it, and it's available to them.
Okay.
They can share it.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Jeffers, I might as well just catch you before you go back. To piggyback on his question, are they taking these stress checks and whatnot daily? And the questions about whether they understand the material, are they doing that daily, or is it depend on the teacher?
It's
or-
really personal choice by the teacher. Teachers, the technology is a tool, but not a mandate for them to use. And so, back in the day, we would use thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. Those are all types of formative assessments. Just if they're using the technology, it's recorded so that they have it for the future. So some of them have really embraced and jumped in and are using it daily, and others are using it from time to time.
Okay, is it, do the number of questions that they ask the students, does it depend on the teacher as well? Or, it's not taking up a ton of time.
The formative assessments are designed to just be one or two questions real quick in the middle of what's going on. The more formal summative assessments are just that, more formal with X number of questions and taken as an assessment, so to speak. The formative assessments, the students don't even realize it's an assessment.
Okay, great, thank you.
If I could just chime in as well. I don't have any questions for you, Dan. Thank you. The great thing about these, stress checks, those are really informal. And so it gives teachers an opportunity, like I can see, I don't have my glasses on, something is bothering me, but I can still focus. And that may happen once or twice a day, as Mr. Jeffers said. And so as a result of that, if a teacher sees that a student, something is bothering a student, now they have the opportunity to just informally at some point say, hey, is everything okay, type thing. And so it may not necessitate, because just like us, sometimes over the course of a day, something may be bothering us, but we can still focus. But if they find that a same student is continuously communicating that he or she is bothered, something is bothering them consistently, I think that's when you would see that parent contact, like say, hey, I just want to let you know, this is what I'm seeing type thing. But what's great about that is some kids, even adults, are really good at hiding, things when something is bothering them. So this just gives our staff members another opportunity. And then they can kind of keep an eye on that child as well. But certainly informally check in with them. And more often than not, if they do, that same child may be fine, may not indicate that something is bothering them later in the day. So it's just a really nice tool.
Ms. Schroeder?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the presentation. I do have some questions. I'm glad to see that we've got some tools in place for trying to close the gap, and just making sure that we get ourselves caught up. My concern that I express, I think every year, it's with the prepared for success. So we don't have more, granular data here, but I would like to understand if there is a plan, more of a global plan, for bringing up the percentage of our kids that are actually making benchmark scores on the ACT, because I think we were at 22%, or 20 or 22%. And I think it's somewhere in the same range that we've had, consistently. So that to me is more of a trend that's not necessarily related to COVID-type closures. Earlier last year, we implemented like a bench, I think it's Torch Prep, ACT tutoring. In the data that you looked at, were you able to see any benefits from that in the math, English? I know what we were planning on doing is having those kids that were close to benchmark or that we thought could reach benchmark in math, English. I don't think science was counted. There's like 3 categories, right? Reading and general language arts. Did we look at that data yet to see whether or not those programs have had a certain amount of effectivity? What is the general trend there? What else can we do as far as getting more kids up to benchmark for those important categories on the test?
So, we mentioned ESSER funds before, and we have also allocated ESSER funds to expand our work with Torch Prep.
Okay.
So, actually just, is this week, election week? Was it last Tuesday? This Tuesday. Torch Prep was here, and they were providing professional development to our teachers in grades 10 through 12 in all core subject areas. So that was an expansion. We focused mostly on ELA and math last year. So they brought in, and this kind of goes back, you might remember, I think Dr. Rice and Mr. Sanders were here last year to talk about some of the results of that. And so in that presentation, they talked about these reports that Torch Prep gives called the low-hanging fruit reports. It's 5 things that, these are the 5 areas that your students struggled in on the practice ACT that was given in October, that if you can work on right now, you could see benefits from that. And the teachers really appreciated those reports again and spent some of that time talking about what changes they're going to make in their classroom now to help students who will, test again in the winter. So that's one thing. We also expanded to include our 9th grade teachers this time. So they got the foundational training that the FHS teachers got last year. So they just received that this past Tuesday too. Because this really needs to be a team effort. It can't be something that starts in just our 10th or 11th grade classrooms. It really has to start much earlier to impact those scores. And so we're making that effort as well. In addition to that, Torch Prep offers those boot camps, and we ran some boot camps last year, and that was for students who were below benchmark. We are actually going to run some sessions for students who are right at benchmark this year too, because just a couple of points on the ACT
makes a difference.
Can make a difference in terms of scholarship money and college entrance and things too. So the boot camps that we had last year were pretty well received. We had some kids who just didn't attend that day. We weren't sure if that was COVID related or not. I think we'll have a better sense for that this year than last. But we are expanding those programs with using our ESSER money to include students below benchmark who might be within a couple of points of hitting the non-remediation score, in addition to students who are right at that benchmark or above, to maybe give them a little boost as well. And so that partnership is still going strong.
Okay. And in our overall Prepared for Success score, what is the biggest driver of that score? Is it the AP? Because I know we're still, we essentially pay for any student that wants to take the AP test. What percentage of kids are actually taking the test? I mean, it's still optional, even though we pay for it. Is that a part that would really boost us up with the Prepared for Success if we had more kids scoring that at least 3, on one of the tests for the AP? Because that was at 15%. So I'm just wondering if we've got some things identified that are causing us to slip on that Prepared for Success. I know a couple of years ago, we talked about it. There were some things that were like easy catches that would have bumped our score up. I'm just wondering, as far as percentages with ACT, Torch Prep, AP Passage, what are some of the other critical factors in that Prepared for Success score that we could look at as like a juicy target or low-hanging fruit? What are we missing there as far as other things that we can do to move us out of the 40-something%?
So, I mean, the first thing is getting students to that non-remediation score on the ACT. Things like AP points or International Baccalaureate or Honors Diploma, that's an add-on. So, it's really about getting students to that non-remediation score.
So the biggest portion is still the ACT, the number of students that score benchmark with the ACT.
So, correct, yeah.
Okay.
And so, what are the things that we can do to help that? I think this is something that we heard from Dr. Rice and his administrative team this week, because they looked not only at their OST data, but also their ACT data from October, which was the practice test. So this was in conjunction with Torch Prep. And what they noticed overwhelmingly is that any question that was a multi-part question, had a long reading passage, a lot of the students skipped it, didn't even attempt to answer it. And that was true, again, on the OST, the Ohio Readiness Assessment, and their ACT practice test. And so one of the things that they talked to us about was, how do we teach test-taking stamina? What are we doing in every single subject area that can allow our students to know that they can answer these multi-part questions? They can, take the time to read, 3 paragraphs and then answer these questions that are related to that. That was a big focus for them, and I thought that was a pretty interesting takeaway from their time with Torch Prep, that their teachers really started to see across all of those tests that there's not that test-taking stamina. So they are committed to working on that really across the board any chance they get.
Okay. One more thing, if you can just bear with me, I'm sorry. Is there a way that we can look at whether or not within our data, those kids that were all taking the test that first time as juniors, compared to maybe a subset of kids that started taking the test in the 10th grade, can we break that data down to determine whether or not encouraging our kids to start taking the ACT, which I preach this all the time, is there data that shows that if we start to encourage kids to take the ACT in the 10th grade so that they build up that test-taking stamina, so by the time they're juniors, when that test actually does not only count for them, but it counts for our Prepared for Success score, can we segregate out of that data whether or not there's a benefit? If there is a benefit, if we start encouraging those kids to take the test earlier, just 1 year earlier, 10th grade, maybe by the end of their 10th grade year, would we see a benefit from that? That's really what I'd like to understand.
Well, I mean, I can just say, from, I think, studies that ACT, the College Board, has done, along with what Torch Prep has told us, you know, we know that students who test multiple times typically see an increase in their scores. That range can be, you know, 2 to 4 points. You know, one of the best things I think now about the ACT is that you can just take one part over again. So you can, you know, based on, you know, your performance on science or your performance on math, decide, I want to take the math portion again. And
Okay.
so you can go back and study specifically in that area and then retest. Whereas, you know, when we took it, you couldn't do that. You were
Right.
taking the whole
One and
thing
done.
over again, yeah, one time. And so that, I think, you know, is something that's beneficial to kids. But, you know, from my experience as a high school AP teacher, you know, to being in this role, I know that there are studies out there that show the more times they take it. Now, if they take it every test administration, I mean, there's a point where you plateau. But typically, you know, if you encourage students to take it 2 to 3 times, you should see an increase in their scores over time.
And I'm just wondering, you know, if we could figure out if at the end of the 10th grade year, if they've accumulated enough math, should we actively encourage our parents to let their kids take a shot at those tests sometime in that spring? Because it's offered in April, and then it's offered again in June. You know, if that is a big portion of our Prepared for Success, which is a critical component, you know, because that's what we're doing. We're preparing kids for success, right? Preparation for life. So if that's a big component of the test, is it value added to start encouraging our parents, you know, to start getting their kids some practice with that test at the end of their 10th grade year versus taking the test for the first time as juniors in February?
I mean, yes, I think there is benefit to that, you know, to encourage parents to do that. You know, it's really, it's going to be interesting moving forward because there's legislation out there that is going to remove the ACT, SAT testing requirement for school districts in the state of Ohio. And so we're very curious to see if this legislation goes through and it becomes just an optional thing, which right now technically it's not optional. We provide a test to every student in either February or March of their junior year. And they are supposed to take that. Do we have kids not show up? Do we have kids who opt out? Yes. But it is meant to test every student and give them an opportunity to take one of these nationally normed tests for free in their home district. So with that legislation that would remove that requirement, you know, we don't even know what this will do to the Prepared for Success measure. So that's a little bit of scuttlebutt, you know, behind the scenes with curriculum directors and stuff. We're like, well, what's going to happen? Like, what is going to happen then? And part of this is, if you look at kind of the national trend of not putting as much emphasis on SAT and ACT for college entrance anymore. So we just don't know. But, you know, back to the original question, we don't really know the future of these tests, but I think to encourage parents and to still promote the value in taking ACT and SAT, because even if your college isn't using that for entrance purposes, we know they're still using it for scholarship purposes. And we certainly wouldn't want any student to miss out on scholarship opportunities, you know,
Right.
because they didn't take the ACT or SAT.
Right. I think it's not only scholarship, but honors placement as well in colleges. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I know there's a lot of questions, but it's important.
Mrs. Gundram, you've been taking lots of notes. Do you have any questions?
Nope, the only question I had was answered by Mr. Jeffers, so I appreciate everything.
I would also caution the board, like the report card, if you remember when we were arguing Ed Choice, part of the argument was they were basing eligibility on report cards, and everybody was arguing that the report card is a flawed system anyway. I mean, just like they're prepared for success like you're talking about, some of those things were, did a student enroll in a college, a university in Ohio, a state college or university in Ohio within 6 months of graduation? Because some of our brightest students that are going to go on to be doctors and attorneys and lawyers may go out of state on full scholarships, and that student dings our score because they didn't go to a state university inside of Ohio. Kids that went on to the University of Dayton or Xavier University dings our score for prepared for success because they didn't go to a state school in Ohio. And so understand what this is. It's great that we have this data in front of us, but we also have to remember that we shouldn't really focus on the report card as much as the rest of this. What has our district done, or are they going to do, to help kids recover from the pandemic? And I have full faith in our teachers. I love the fact that they're really doing things that they've been doing, you know, checking with colleagues. What successes have you had in the classroom? How have you reached students? They're making adjustments to the instruction if things aren't working. And so, while all those are great questions and important to get answers to, I don't want to lose focus on, it doesn't matter what happens to you in life, it's how you react to it. So we had this pandemic that kind of set us back a little bit. Of course, I mean, our scores have always been good, and I love the fact that we're not happy with just being just above average. Like, we want to excel. And of course, we've always had that here at Fairfield. And I love the fact that we're having this discussion to say, how can we excel? And I love the fact that you weren't hiding anything. Like, it's all out here for us. But again, don't lose the fact that the report card is just a measuring tool, and certain aspects of it aren't really even valid measurements. And so I love the fact that our curriculum department is, and we now have more technology to help kids get along in advance. And I love hearing what we're doing, and that's what I want to take away from this, not what the actual report card scores are. And I do love the fact, like Mrs. Shorter pointed out, that we do allow kids to take these exams for free, like we're paying for that, and that will help them be prepared for college if they want to go, and help them get scholarships if they need it. But don't lose focus on what are we doing to help every child, not just the ones that are going to go on to school. So I appreciate the information you brought to us this evening. I took a lot of notes as well. I didn't take nearly as many as Mrs. Gundrum, because she's an attorney and she's used to taking all these notes. But thank you. I know you'll keep us updated on what's going on. And if you have any questions that you need them to respond to, that'd be great. But I just don't want to lose focus on, let's not just worry about what the report card is, because everyone in Ohio knows that it's a flawed measurement anyway. So I just wanted to say that to everybody.
And our teachers and our building leaders are doing great things this year. And Mr. Smith and Mr. Martin and myself have all, we're visiting all the buildings right now. We're talking to them specifically about instruction. What are we doing to focus our efforts to close the gap, address the learning loss, and
Right.
move us forward to get us even, beyond where we were pre-pandemic.
Right.
And so those meetings have just been, really great. I leave them and I'm so energized, I'm like, let's go get after it. We're doing great things for kids. And that's, really what is most important. We might have all of this data in front of us, but how are we using it every single
Right.
day to do what's best for
And
kids?
it's good to get those assessments in front of them, because
Yeah.
they have to know what is working, what isn't working. And I've talked to several teachers, and they are energized. They love having the kids back in the classroom. They can't wait to get them moving, and they understand that some have fallen behind a little bit, but they have the passion to talk to colleagues and find out what's been working with you, and what is working before may not be working now. I mean, you have to adjust. And of course, you know, every child comes in with a different situation or circumstance, and you have to make that adjustment as well. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming this evening and keeping us up to date about what's going on. And please pass along to your teams that they're doing a great job, and we appreciate all their efforts to make sure that our kids are not falling too far behind. Anybody else have anything else to add? And thank you, Mrs. Shorter. You always have great questions. I love it. I love the fact that you have those. And I think that our school district is getting better because you are setting those benchmarks. So thank you so much for that.
No problem. I just, you know,
Yeah, that's great.
I have a kid who's looking at all this. I've looked
Oh,
at
yeah.
this for a while, and I know the college grind is real.
Sure,
It is real.
sure.
So much is riding on that, so.
Right. Great. Anything else from anybody else? Okay.